So just to introduce briefly Annette McKay. She's also been campaigning. She's a campaigner for the 796 children buried at Tuam Mother and Babies, well, what's left of the Tuam Mother and Babies home. And she is the daughter of Maggie. Welcome, Annette. Looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you to the Irish Women's Lobby, who since the first webinar that we did, I feel like I found my tribe. We meet, we cry, we support each other, we talk, we rage. And in particular this week, when what's happening in Afghanistan again around vulnerable women and children, it just seems it's broke all our hearts, hasn't it? So although I entitled my talk Walking Through Ireland's Institution with My Mother, I really should have started this presentation with Ireland's institutions came to live in my home as a small child, and it was many, many years before they disappeared. One of my earliest and most critical memories of this time is in a children's home. My mother was in hospital with what has been described as a very serious attempt at suicide. I ended up in the care of nuns, and without knowing why, I was frightened of them. One sunny afternoon, a lady came, took me by the hand, and walked me out of this home. It was my mother. With unimaginable courage, she left hospital and walked miles to collect her 3 children and take them home. But the nuns followed us and became part of my childhood. When Mum talked about the nuns, she was in trouble, tormented by memories of hurt and pain and what the nuns did to me. Neighbours would come and put us to bed while we listened to Mum's anguished crying and calm English voices trying to soothe her with tea and reassurance. Sometimes she would run away, and then things became scary and urgent. Where was she, and would she return? She was different to other mums. She spoke in a different way. Maggie was Irish, and this was what defined her. I wanted her to be like other mums and put flowers on the altar and go to church, so we didn't stand out at our Catholic school. But she would not perform, and so we were outcasts, never picked for anything, and made to carry out menial tasks for teachers who did not smile kindly on us. Mum was a troublemaker, quick to defend her children in her way, but overwhelmed by too many demands on non-existent reserves. Home was very clean, ultra clean, and there could be no infringement on clean. Beds had to be made a certain way and could be stripped endlessly until she was satisfied. Clothes had to be folded on chairs, and bed was no safety from these rules. It hurt very much to break rules, and the pain and the humiliation could be told to nobody. 6 children created an enormous amount of work in a time before washing machines and labour-saving devices. Mum was so proud of her status as the mum with the cleanest children and the whitest washing. Looking at her poor misshapen hands in old age reminded me of freezing cold washing and difficult attempts to dry it in the long winter months. Years later, I realised these were the rules she learned in her first prison, Lennaboy Castle in Galway. The happy, cheeky tomboy that she was became the difficult, deeply unhappy woman who I called Mum. Walking through Lennaboy Industrial School as an adult on a cold winter's day many years later showed me what my mother endured as that cheeky girl became a young teenager with many bruises and a shaved head. She was ultra sensitive to any perceived slight and could wound deeply with her hands and words. The nuns taught her well. A truism. Damaged, angry parents raise damaged, angry children. And in mine and my siblings' case, I know this to be true. There was no place for empathy and kindness in a home where survival came first. We left early and imagined we'd left behind a childhood filled with terror and unknowns. Now it was time to try and understand who Maggie was and what had happened to that small, fearless girl her beautiful Galway friends told me and my sister all about. My mother was taken at 12 to Lennaboy, sentenced by a court, and walked through Galway to a cold, forbidding prison on the hill. The doors closed, and the life Maggie had known was gone forever. Now all she knew was work, beatings, cold, hunger, and humiliation. Some of these lessons spilled over into our childhood, but love was present too. Love was not cuddles and kisses, but clean beds and warm clothes. That indomitable woman who rescued her children expended all her energy into feeding, clothing, and keeping her children safe. All the basic needs denied her, she ensured we had them. Wednesdays, we walked to town. My mother, hoping my deadbeat father would have paid money into the court for his children. Money meant shopping and the bus home. No money meant asking for credit in the local shop and a long walk home. Humiliation for that proud woman. She grew older and the memories seemed less painful. Grandchildren came along and Maggie enjoyed being free to see them without the worry of mothering them. Then the birth of a great-grandchild tipped us back into another horrifying institution. No hugs for the great-grandson, just heart-rending sobs of loss and heartbreak. My mother sobbing for her baby, Mary Margaret, her bonny baby. A dead child, she was told, and now be on your way. It's hard to comprehend that she kept the secret of Mary Margaret for 70 years. So deep was the shame and stigma inflicted on her that only the sight of a loved baby unlocked that secret. How could we help? How could we find one tiny baby in a small grave in the west of Ireland? Mum never cried again for that lost child, and it was understood that the mention of this child had been a one-off. She would not visit that heartbreak and pain again. She had endured separation from this child, another industrial school, an awful birth, and a lonely exit back to Galway, where Maggie's troubles were not acknowledged or understood. True Mother and Baby Home did not enter our lives until many years later. A story in a national newspaper about 796 dead children buried in a sewage pit sent me looking for Mary Margaret's death certificate. She was a Tuam baby. A life of 6 short months, and who knows how many times Maggie was allowed to hold and care for her child. To stand on that site, knowing children are literally beneath your feet, unknown and unburied, is a vision of hell. Justice is slow coming for survivors and the families like ours who live with the knowledge of a dead child in a former sewage pit. My mother was spared from this final horror, and it's a twisted world when I had to be grateful that Alzheimer's would mean she would never know about her dead baby's final resting place. I'd campaigned long and hard in order to reunite my mother with her bonny baby. 6 years later, it looks a faraway dream with no sense of justice for any mother and child. The last institution that came into Maggie's life was supposed to make a difference. Redress, an apology, and some compensation for all she had suffered as a child. She wasn't terribly excited until I explained that she could get a regular taxi and spend money in her favourite corner shop. Marks and Spencer's was Mum's happy place, and the staff were very tolerant of Maggie, who loved them 1 minute and shouted for her money back the next. After years of wrangling and an Irish taxpayer-funded legal team, she was awarded money. Not enough, the legal team said. The redress board made the rules. They should apply the rules fairly. I appealed. So they stole that award and gave her a pittance. They looked at the picture of her beautiful face and told me to be grateful that she'd once seemed happy. She didn't know. Alzheimer's was taking her, and she told me £40 would be riches. The pittance ensured that in her last years, she was dressed as a duchess and enjoyed treats with her visitors. The imperious Maggie was in charge, and neither Alzheimer's or any of the institutions stole the love she felt for her children and grandchildren. Although the institutions came and inhabited our home, they also ensured that we had no Irish home. I jokingly told Christine I never learned to river dance, but we grew up with no sense of where we fitted as second generation Irish. There is very little confidence about your place in the Irish world in the diaspora. Ireland is a loved place with loved people, but I am always afraid I will break rules because I don't know what the rules are. And now it is Maggie's children who speak with a funny accent, and this marks us out as different. Strangers in a strange land, and no amount of yearning will change that. There is loneliness for second generation people, and now I understand when my mother talked about her loneliness for her people. There needs to be a recognition of the unique place we all hold and an acceptance of our mixed heritage. I've cried my tears. I've walked the Via Dolorosa with her and for her. I wish Ireland could have known, loved, and admired the beautiful, courageous woman she was. Ireland let her down. The final report from the Commission into Mother and Baby Homes let her down. She rose above all that life had thrown at her, and I hope one day she's reunited with her bonny baby. Wait for me, Mum. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, so much for that. That was extremely moving altogether. I suppose what I can only say, and it's like listening to both yourself and Anna, I'm absolutely devastated that the country I love so much has been so absolutely appallingly cruel and vicious to some of the most vulnerable of her people. Like, I mean, it's just awful. And Annette, thank you so much. I know the people are really moved hearing your story and your story of your mom. And
Christine, can I just tell you one story about it? Because I thought long and hard. I did not want to blame her. I don't blame her. She was Mum and she loved us and we loved her. And when I was a student nurse in the 1960s, I had my first serious boyfriend, and he was from Jamaica, Rowan. And I took him home to meet Mum, and I swaggered down the road thinking that I was Coretta King, look at me, and brazen and brassy, she would say. So came to our house for tea, and he had tea, and I wondered what she'd think about him. And the words were, that boy was raised by beautiful parents. He's got fabulous manners, unlike my own heathen daughter.
She sounds like she was a real character, and I know it is very hard. I know we've talked about this before. It's very hard because I know from my own experience, it's very difficult sometimes to, we love our parents, and I think particularly when they've had such difficult circumstances, we sometimes feel disloyal, like even mentioning the fact that, because the truth is that the harms that were done to those children, to those women, those who don't get the proper love, the care, the nourishing that they need, they're damaged by it. And it's very difficult then when they're raising their own children to give what they themselves didn't get. But as you said, she showed her love the only way that she'd been taught, if you like, or the only way that was available to her. And, you were shiny, clean, and, but you did, she was loved. And the reality is she raised some fantastic children. She really did.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Annette. I know I can see by the chat that everybody is very moved by both of your testimonies. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you some questions that have been put in by our participants, and we'll have a little discussion with the three of us. So first of all, I have a question for you, Anna, from a woman in the audience, Anna, and another Anna in the audience. Did any international bodies support you in your 2012 plus research, Anna? Amnesty International, UNICEF, etc. And did anyone actually try and get them to help you with this, or but did they offer any help? Oh, your microphone. There you are.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay. We can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, no, I've done most of myself. Unfortunately, I was out of work sick. Um, I had issues in work and I had a breakdown in 2013, which resulted in me having PTSD and depression. So I kind of became agoraphobic and now she's seen a lot of it, and very high PTSD and awake for a lot of hours. So a lot of my research was done in the dark of night and when I couldn't sleep and when I had no other outlet. No, but we did get, I found a solicitor who actually is helping in the background with my own case. No, nobody in Ireland reached out to us, but we did have two barristers from England reach out to us. Well, we actually, the girl reach out, Zara, and then she brought her colleague, Carl, on. So they've been helping us around the grave. So that's it. As I say, I know there is a group called the Clan Project, but they've never reached out to us. No, we've just done our research ourselves. Foot slogging and detective work and just interacting. That's how we met in Annette. We met like kind of through Tume and just different survivors, and then you try to piece together stories and you know you follow up on leads, and then people get to know you, and then they'd send you on stuff, and then you kind of get the whistleblower kind of thing behind the background. So
yeah, and I have another question. I might just go to you again, Anne, if you don't mind, just because given the scale of the scandal that you've outlined and the complicity of the state in that scandal, is there hope at all, do you think, in future to take this outside Ireland for an independent European investigation?
well, I'm not a legal, but from the best of my knowledge, you have to exhaust all the avenues. That's what we've been advised. We're in the country. Like you can go to the UN. I spoke to Maud Boer about this. She came over here, but I mean, we're only a tiny part of a portfolio. And if you do get to Europe, you get maybe 6 minutes to talk about it. But everything has to be exhausted here. And with the delays, the prevarication, the obfuscation, you know, it's so destroying. And what we'll do is, I had a professor say to me that he had been helping around the grave with DNA, and he said, but the more I got to know about this, he said, the more I started to get interested. And he said, Anna, he said, it's like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. Mm. And there's so many twists and turns. You know that, Anne, we're sent off down a tunnel and it's a dead end. And then we back up and then we're sent another direction. And then we're told this will happen and it doesn't happen. And then you have to go and switch back. And also as well, you have to keep really on top of this because different kind of reports and different kind of statements will come out from different sections. And what happens is it's like whack-a-mole. You have to be on top of with a very big hammer to kind of, you know, not to miss anything because one will contradict the other. But do I see us ever getting there? Well, I hope so. Maybe not in my lifetime. I mean, we're very aging community. I mean, Lolo is you're not an so, but like we already have lost two of our group this year. We have lost Des Lally in America, and Des had a terrible battle trying to make contact with the commission. I mean, it took a year and a half, I think, before they picked up the phone even to ring him. And I mean, he's only one of many. I asked how they advertised this in America, and they said they went to a couple of Irish clubs and they went to the embassy. I mean, how do you call that advertising? I mean, I had a man on 90 years of age from England living in a small rural village who knew nothing about the commission till his daughter seen the report, and he'd been two homes here in Ireland. So I don't believe, like, I mean, the fact that we didn't look at all the homes, which is very strange, even the mother and baby homes, only a select, and the fact that it wasn't advertised correctly. I mean, do we ever see justice? I don't know, but we keep plowing on. Won't we, Annette?
You'd have to wonder, is it a case of because I mean, one of the most startling things, of course, is that there's been no murder charges or charges on fraud, for example, you know, where it's documented that they were claiming for babies that weren't alive, they were claiming for women that were no longer with them. And yes, Annette?
I just like to say a very surprising development has been the guards in Dublin contacting me to ask about my mother's rape in Glennaboy when she was 17, and what I could tell them. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And what's more shocking to me was in the final commission report was the talk about the 12-year-old, 13-year-old mothers. Well, could we not talk about 12 and 13-year-old child abuse victims first and foremost, and who was investigating the crimes that took a 12 or a 13-year-old into those places of hell to give birth? And he's coming to see me this week. We've spoke, we've had Zoom meetings, and he said, well, what do you want to see happen? I said, we're not going to, there's going to be no court case, there's going to be no vindication of what happened to Mum, but at least if there was an acknowledgement from the guards, another institution that let these women and children down. No rape case was investigated, no man ever went to prison for the reasons these women were incarcerated in these hellholes. Maybe an apology is all we can expect.
I suppose the thing is that, I mean, I think it'd be interesting, the idea of maybe bringing in something like corporate manslaughter. I mean, the reality is that there was profiteering going on. And of course, there were all sorts of businesses that were also making profits on the back of the cheap forced labour that was being provided in the Magdalene laundries, not to mind the money that was made by the religious orders from the illegal adoption of children. And of course, you'd have to wonder, how much of that ill-gotten gain is still residing in some of the families with positions of power and privilege in this country. We certainly know of one former TD's family that was involved in, it's a matter of public record, the physical and sexual assault of a young girl who was in fact free labour in their home. And of course there was, whilst there was the religious orders, of course there was all the other state-run institutions and all kinds of money being pocketed from that. So it would be difficult not to conclude, or at least have the suspicion, that some of the reason why they're waiting for people to die, or they keep pushing out it as long as possible, is they want to have enough distance between the ill-gotten gains that are the inherited wealth of some of the golden circles in this country that is being facilitated by their dreadful treatment of survivors. And I was just going to actually ask if either of you have a question that you'd like to come up with for each other. There's something that you'd like to ask each other that we can then share with some information or some insight that you'd like everyone.
Well, you can see, Christine, that we never struggle with words or to speak, but we struggle with even, we support each other, we support the group, we support anybody who comes forward. But I gave evidence at the commission, and then it turns out my evidence to the confidential committee destroyed, miraculously reappeared again, then it wasn't used, then it was sent back to me. The alternative commission report says they have no intention of re-interviewing the women. So the 500 people like myself who gave evidence have just been trashed. So I think about it, and I think the way they set up, and we've talked about it, haven't we, Anna, around we go to these places where the working class, as I think of myself, meet the middle class, and the same kind of setup. It was set up as me going into a room facing a panel of very well-spoken Irish women who had talked about their titles and their academic achievements, and you know, we set the pace of we are here and you are here. So it's amazing to us that there's just replication and repetition of the way we are treated as the voiceless, the working classes, the vulnerable, the poor, and the hierarchy still remains the hierarchy. Still had that power over my testimony, which is now worthless. They sent it back to me in a tick box sheet, and in one of the tick boxes it says final destination of the baby, death. So these women with their titles and their middle class privileged world couldn't step down into our world and imagine themselves in that cold, hungry, terrible place, because if you did, we think there would be much more action and willingness to write and give redress.
But sorry, can I just come in there as well? Because a lot of people that went into the commission were steered in to the confidential committee because, according to James Gallen, that's what was advertised. So people didn't realise where they were actually going. You know, the way they wanted to lock down you wanted to give private. No, you didn't want to give private testimony. You thought you were going into the commission.
I did.
And as you always said, Annette, tell your story, peel it back like an onion, bleed all over the floor, collect your bus fare at the door, goodbye now. No backup services, no nothing, right?
No.
Absolutely horrendous, the treatment of people. You know, over and above what they wrote and what they did. People didn't even get it. I was invited into the commission, and the reason I didn't go in, and Mary Daly said on the Oxford seminar that I was invited in several times. I wasn't. I was invited in once. But the reason I didn't go in is because the case of my two brothers were with the police, and under Section 19 of the Commissions Act, any testimony given to the commission can't be used ongoing in criminal trials. And I kind of, why would I go in? Why would I want to go in? And what Annette was saying there about being looked down, and I spoke to a man who was a survivor of the industrial homes, and his wife was a survivor of the Magdalene homes. They're a lovely couple. They were in their late 70s, early 80s. But he told me when he went in to be interviewed by the Industrial Homes Commission that the judge said, "And where do you live?" And he said, "I live in Foxrock." The judge said, how did you manage that? Like, you're supposed to be in a small garret with 25 children and your wife pregnant again. He said, well, actually, he said, I didn't manage. He said, my solicitor and my auctioneer managed it for me. But this speaking down to people, you know, afraid that you might live beside them. I mean, I found it absolutely disgusting. And then the wife was very sarcastic. She said, oh, I got an increase in my Magdalene pension. I'm getting extra €10. They said, I'm so excited. And a medical card with the survivor of the Magdalene home typed on top of it. You know, I mean, where do you get out?
I mean, talk about adding insult to injury. I mean, in reality, the middle classes, when they weren't profiting off the industrial complex of incarcerated women and children, poor women and children, they were definitely remained silent about it. That has to be sure. There was certainly, with rare exception, the reality is they all knew it was going on. It was in the towns, it was in every county in Ireland, multiple locations, and yet they didn't seem to feel the need to speak up or to raise the issue about it at all. And of course, it
But
was,
being poor was a stigma, and it was your fault you were poor.
mm,
Your fault. You know, so you had to pay for the sin of being poor. Like
yeah,
not help you up. Like just trample you down. So as I say, the fodder for the machine,
yeah,
you know, the fodder for sweeping up the streets, you know, no
yeah,
expectation because
yeah,
I mean I'm 65 this year and 2 years before I was due to start in secondary school, it became free. Before that you had to pay to go to second level education. It became free. And I got accepted by one of the schools that had been a private school. And I went to my father and my mother, and they said, "Oh, Anna's results are excellent. We were so looking forward to having her." The nuns again, of course, the polished. I always remember the smell of the polished leather furniture. And they said, "But we would be expecting towards a Joe just voluntary donation of I think it was £50 a year. My father was earning £8 a week at that stage, so that put paid to that. But anyway, I did get to go on to secondary school. But then again, you also see in the secondary schools, I was very interested in science. There was no science available because you were a woman. You got to learn shorthand and typing and get ready to go into the office.
Mm.
So that was your lot, you know. But
oh yes, always happy to keep people in their places. That's for
and get your boob felt by one of your bosses in your first job when you're only 18, you know.
So listen, I just ask you to answer fairly shortly, if you don't mind, Annette. There's another question in here before we move to Beth's recording. So there's a question in for you. What is it that you feel survivors most need in order to move on, Annette? And do you think they'll get it?
I can answer the latter question first. No, I've lost any small bit of optimism. You know, we've lost years with COVID. You know, everybody's suffered with COVID, but we talk, myself and Anna, and just feel we are at a complete full stop. And that's the first time I think we've ever felt the doors are closed everywhere to us. But what could survivors have? I think it's such a still a hidden part of Irish history. And when the Magdalens, they did the thing at the Mansion House, welcoming the Magdalens home. But that's a very nice gesture, but they're not embedded into Irish life, culture, history. That was a special thing. They did. I don't think they wanted. I don't think our story wants to be treated as special. We want to feel that it's understood and it's acknowledged what happened to our mothers and all the mothers. But my mother was never. She could never walk the streets of Galway as Maggie Connor. She was Maggie the black sheep. Maggie Connor with the quotation marks around her. That's how she would feel. She never felt at ease because she was known. So to take the burden away from the women and the children that went through this and to put it squarely back, it's also begrudging. So the apology from the Bon Secours, who refused to speak to us at any time. We are only talking to the commission, you know, blah, blah, blah. Every door was closed to us when we tried just to get a small bit of information. So everything was begrudging. It never started from this terrible thing has happened and we will do our utmost to understand, to, you know, give these people back their dignity and their respect, to make their lives physically, financially better as much as we possibly can, and place them back in Irish society. Not as special, but as people something was done to, and they are recognised and respected for the people that they are.
I think sorry, go
Sorry,
on.
just one very important thing I want to say here. I just want to comment about one person as a tie up to what I spoke about. One of our group members was born in Tuam, And she was subsequently boarded out, as you know, the boarding out system, which is like fostering now. And she was 7 or 8, and she was raped and abused for 2 years by the man of the house, who was in his late 60s. And then she was transferred from there back to the industrial home in Ballinasloe. And from there, they decided there was something wrong with her, so they put her in the mental home. And she was sent from the mental home then to the Magdalen home in Limerick. And she was sent back from the Magdalen home in Limerick back to the industrial home in Ballinasloe. And then she was sent to the mental home again in Ballinasloe. That was her life before she was 16.
Jesus.
So if that doesn't show you that these all worked as a unit, she started her journey in June, ended up in a mental home, but they decided to break them down into bite-sized pieces. She's had to interact with the Commission of Investigation into the industrial homes. She's had to interact with the Magdalen home. Now she's interacting with the mother and baby home. This is one life. This is what happened to her. She shouldn't be parsed off into small pieces like this, you know. And I mean, again, she's one of the diaspora living in England.
It's just.
Can I just say something, Christine? Sorry to interrupt. For me personally, one of the things is to lose the labels plastic Bernadette and the plastic Paddies. So a recognition as well that, you know, I go to Ireland, and as she did here, my mum, when she opened her mouth, oh, it's Maggie, she's Irish. It's Annette, she's English. But just a recognition, and, you know, we've talked about this before, about the diaspora is big, and a lot of them are very confident. But hidden in there, there's a lot of lonely, displaced people, and their children feel lonely and displaced, I'm sure. So a recognition, there's no research, there's no idea around discussions about what happened when we let these poor, damaged people out of these institutions. What was their life like afterwards? There's nothing.
It's just, there aren't even, the truth is there aren't even words to try and cover, and certainly we can do no justice whatsoever in such a brief sessions. We have, funnily enough, my own mother worked with homeless Irish, mainly men, it probably would have been, who've been over there for years, but of course a lot of those people would have come out of these institutions one way or another, or as you say, many institutions in individual cases. There is no doubt that what we need to do is we really need to expose this, talk about this, and embrace all those who we shunned and locked away and abused and tortured, and actually welcome them back in and recognise that they were always of Irish society. And in fact, they're a terrible symbol of so much that was wrong with Irish society. Still is, to a certain extent, that's for sure, particularly when we see the covering up. So I'd like to thank you both very much for your presentations this evening. And it's just been, I know that people who've been watching have been very moved. We will be, of course, putting it on the website so that people can watch it in more detail, and we'll be sharing it more generally in social media. So I'd like to just thank you both very much before I just introduce Beth's segment now. Thank you both.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.